On you go.
Thank you everyone for coming to listen to the talks today. My name's Dr. Christian Buckland. I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a doctor of psychology. And when I saw the topic of government control on the agenda for today, I thought I really want to be here because this is something I've been talking about for the last 3 years. Has psychology been weaponized, and what techniques have been used against us? And originally when I sat down to write this talk, I was going to talk on informed consent. So if you look in the brochure, it says I'm going to talk on the fact that the psychological techniques that were used on us negated everyone's ability to give informed consent to a COVID injection. But as I was writing, I realized that there was lots of rumblings around saying that, are we returning to mandates? Is there going to be a lockdown coming in September or October? Are mask mandates coming back? And I thought, perhaps it's going to be really good to look back at what has happened over the last 3 years in terms of the psychological techniques that have been used on the public to gain behavioural change without the public's knowledge. Because if we can be open to looking at what's happened, we can start to predict the future. We can start telling our neighbours who might not think like us what might be coming next. Because the more people who are aware of what's happening and that there's psychological manipulation taking place, the more people that will start to see the world that we see it. The other thing I want to say is that if you can start to understand the techniques that were used for COVID, you'll start to see how it's being used in all other different agendas and ideologies. And if you look on the screen here, this was taken from the UN website. And it's the UN Secretary General saying behavioural science is a critical tool for the UN to progress on its mandate, whatever that is. And it goes on to say that UN entities are strongly encouraged to invest in behavioural science. Now, behavioural science is just basically behavioural psychology. It's a nice word for it. And the UN entities consist of things like the World Bank, the IMF, the Food and Agricultural Organisation, the World Meteorological Organisation. So you're going to see behavioural psychology being used to further many, many different agendas. And I've taken this also from the UN website because I thought it was really important. They were saying these are 5 topics, even though I've just put 4 on, to fit on the screen, that they really feel behavioural psychology can be used to further. And the first one you'll see is health. And you'll see there they're saying by emphasising social norms and trusted messengers, we can increase vaccination rates. And those are 2 techniques. Climate, going to see the same thing being used there. And gender equality, same thing. The last one, management and administration or sludge reduction, I think is really important because there were pictures attached to all of these boxes, but I had to remove them because they had a copyright symbol on. And the last one had a picture of a credit card with a receipt that said voucher. So I think that's giving us a hint that they're going to use behavioural psychology to get rid of cash and bring in digital currencies. So just be aware. The good news is this is nothing new. Governments have been using psychology for centuries. So this isn't anything new. The good news is we now have the internet. We can tell people what's going on. We know that these things are happening. And the reason why I put a quote from the psychological literature on the screen is I wanted to point out that they're saying that that psychology has been used for clandestine purposes such as conducting torture. And to me, the lockdowns, the deaths caused unnecessary, the mask mandates, the vaccine injuries and deaths, they feel like torture to me. And I also want to say that the many good doctors who are speaking here have found themselves unwillingly put into the position of being those persecuted political opponents. So I want to say a huge thank you to every doctor and scientist and everyone who speaks out. So what are these psychological techniques? I've put just a few of them on the screen. I'm going to whiz through them really, really quickly. Now, the first one, and everyone's going to know them, we've been hearing the word fear all day, is the nudges. And now nudges sound, it's not too bad, it's just a little nudge. It's not a shove, it's not a shove, it's just a nudge. So nothing's too bad, but actually to me, they are the most dangerous of almost all of the behavioural science techniques. And a good way to describe the nudges are the fact that if behavioural scientists know that if we do this to the population, this will be the outcome. So it's very predictable. And the most important and easy nudges to describe are when we use psychological techniques to induce the feelings of fear, shame and guilt. And we know that fear has been the driving force behind the entire COVID narrative. Artificially increasing the levels of fear by saying, if you get COVID, you're going to die. There's no cure for it. I remember that phrase, COVID doesn't discriminate. It clearly does. It goes after the elderly and the people who are very, very poorly. We've also, well, and what the thing about fear is that when everyone is frightened, they go on a quest for knowledge because they want to reduce that anxiety. And that explained why everyone tuned into the government daily press briefings, because they were hoping that the father figure, so in my country was the Prime Minister, the father figure would give the scared children a little bit of reassurance. Don't worry, everything's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. But instead, they were given more and more fear to keep the cycle going. We also saw the use of shame. And that, to me, has been an awful thing. We've heard some of the good doctors talking about how they've been shamed for just speaking the truth. But one thing that happened to the public in my country was we had the chief of the Metropolitan Police saying that she hopes that the public will shame other members of the public into compliance, which to me is one of the most unethical things there is. Because I work with shame a lot in my day job, and putting people who struggle with sort of feelings of shame, maybe something's happened to them in the past, putting them in a position where they have a shame response is greatly dangerous. It really, really is. And then, of course, we had the guilt nudge as well. The health secretary saying, don't catch coronavirus and spread it around and kill granny, something like that. So there was a lot of guilt, and loads of children really believed they were going to kill their grandparents. So the nudges, we all know them. Then we got heuristics. And that's creating mental shortcuts in the public, reinforcing the status quo. And a really easy way of sort of suggesting this is letting people make other decisions for you. Because as human beings, we don't like making difficult decisions. What if we get it wrong? So it's a lot easier to hope that someone else has made it. So that's why you saw in the media all of these videos and news reports of queues and queues of people outside of vaccination centres. So the public would go, oh, it's the right thing to do. They've all gone through the difficult decision-making process. I can just follow them. And then when they tell you that supply of the vaccines are scarce, even more people go, I better go and get one now. We've also seen commitment bias being used. Easiest way to describe this to me is doubling down on something. So even though something has changed, you remain committed to the cause. And that's what we saw when originally we were told that the vaccines will stop you catching and spreading COVID. And when the data became quite clear that's not the case at all, you saw a deliberate push for politicians and celebrities to post on Twitter, I've just tested positive for COVID, but thanks to the vaccines, I'm double boosted, I'm not too bad. And what that was all about doing was saying to people, forget what we originally told you, that it's going to stop you getting it and spreading it. It's all about it doesn't make COVID so bad. So people remained committed to their original view that the vaccine was good. Then we've got cognitive and availability bias, again, helping to create more mental shortcuts in the public. And this is where we fill in the blanks when we're trying to create a risk assessment with the most easily and available stored memories. And this is the reason why we had censorship. So when I said the nudges are the worst one, this one is also the worst one as well, because this is the one that promoted the use of censorship. Because when people were conducting their risk assessment early on, they were having to pull on what available information they had. So, you know, the good doctors here couldn't get the word out. Vitamin D, you never heard anyone talking about that. You heard all of the fear. So that one is one of the most dangerous ones, it really is. And then we've got sludge. And if you remember a minute ago, I said they were going to use sludge reduction potentially to get rid of cash and to promote digital currencies. What sludge is where you're given two choices. One really easy option, one really difficult option. The first option is coated in lovely non-stick shiny Teflon. If you take that option, you slide through life with ease. The other option is coated in sludge. If you take that one, it's going to be like wading through treacle. And that's what we saw with the vaccine rollout. It's not just going to stop you spreading it and getting it. If you don't take one, you can't go on holiday. You probably can't get into a nightclub. You're probably going to lose your job. And you're probably going to get called a granny killer. So everyone wants an easy life, so most people will then take the easy option. So lots and lots of people chose to get a COVID injection, even though the risk assessment they had done said they didn't want one, but they did it because of things like the fear and the shame and the guilt that their children have been locked up for 2 years and they just want to take them on a holiday. So Sludge is a really, really powerful one because it convinces people who have already made a decision to go against their original decision. And then we've got the trusted messengers. And we saw this really early on, and we still see it now, where celebrities, doctors, scientists, they are promoted to push the original narrative. And I found it really interesting, because I remember seeing a video where the UN were boasting that they had a collaboration with TikTok to get certain doctors verified status so their reach was increased. And that was all about flooding the internet. Censor any doctors saying anything different, and elevate our specific messenger doctors. So those were just some of the techniques, and I appreciate I've just whistled through them. But I wanted to also offer some of sort of my views and my sort of observations of other psychological techniques that we use to back up those behavioural science techniques. And the first one is infantilization, coercion and incentives, rewarding and punishing, just how parents often parent their children. But another way of looking at infantilization is that in the UK, we could say that the Prime Minister at the time was the father figure, the National Health Service was the mother figure, and the children were the public. And what we saw was mum and dad manipulating and lying to the public. And that's always made me wonder, could there be a correlation between people who have witnessed manipulation in the past, whether that's from parents or caregivers, or been in relationships where they've seen it, and people who are quick to question the official narrative? I don't know, but I wonder. The other one which I find really worrying is idolization. In the UK, we were encouraged to place the National Health Service on the highest pedestal ever. Children were told to paint rainbows with "Thank the NHS" and "Save the NHS" and place them outside their home. And on a Thursday, we went outside and we clapped for the NHS. And if your neighbour didn't clap, you told them off and told them to get out there. And what that did was enable something called cognitive dissonance to occur. And cognitive dissonance is where you hold two conflicting beliefs at the same time that shouldn't really exist together, but you allow them to. So on one hand, we had everyone saying the NHS is the best thing ever. It's amazing. And at the same time, they also knew that lots and lots of people were dying in their own homes from any disease going because the NHS had effectively closed its doors. So lots of unnecessary death because the NHS had closed, but thank you NHS, it's wonderful. So idolization really worries me. When we're told that someone or something is really good and something or someone is really bad, always question, is that a psychological operation? And we often see that with war. And speaking of war, the language that was used was really reminiscent of all things to do with war. We're all in it together. No one is safe till we're all safe. They were all designed to feed into a good versus evil scenario. Because everyone wants to be the good guy. We all dream about being a superhero or being the good guy. We very rarely dream about being a villain. I hope not. And what that does is put us all into camps. We're the good guys, we're the evil guys. And then it became a kind of very, what's the right word? Well, I suppose tribe is the right word. It meant that there were people who were questioning the narrative, who were the baddies. It was nice, and people actually like having an enemy. It gives us a sense of purpose and meaning to our lives. And over the last, 20 years, we've become less and less meaningful. Life has become very stale. Technology has really increased a dependency on other use of technology, and that has taken us away from a connection with things like God and society and other things. So people were really lacking meaning. And this is why it's really difficult to get through to certain people. Even when you present new data, they will still say things like, but people are dropping dead in the streets in China, Christian. And you show them the data and nothing changes. And it's because they don't want to lose that sense of connection and meaning and purpose that they built up in 2020. It's very alluring. And that is why the vaccine injured are one of the most heavily censored group there are. I'm the psychological advisor to the largest COVID vaccine injury support group in the UK, and I have never witnessed something so awful that goes on with them. They are telling their lived experience stories. This happened to me. And all of a sudden YouTube just take them down. It is extremely dehumanizing. And the reason why that occurs is because those stories do change people's opinions. They get through to the people who are really stuck because they look at the vaccine injured and say, but they're like me. They took it. They thought this was right. And now they're injured and no one's listening to them. No one cares. So the vaccine injured are so censored because they do get through. And we've also seen people talking about repetition a lot. When you see a lot of repetition, is that another psychological operation? 3-word phrases were really used. They're very hypnotic. Hands, face, space was being used all over the time in the UK. Because what that does, it provides an access to people's unconscious processes. And that helps people to start behaving without actually thinking. And that is the whole premise of behavioral science. Change people's behaviors without them even knowing that you're changing the behaviors. And the last one I brought up, I just put it up there kind of when I was typing this up, and it's overriding the mind's protective measures. Because there's a phenomena called psychic numbing. And what that is that when people originally see suffering for the first time, they spring into action. They demand a response from the government and from other people. But over time, that leaping into action and demanding a response dwindles. People get numb to it. Because if it didn't, we'd be left in a state of constant trauma. So the mind has a very good protective mechanism that makes people go, it's the same suffering. I don't need a response. Well, not the same level of response. And that's making me wonder, is this why we're constantly being drip-fed different things to be frightened of? Be frightened of inflation, food shortages. We've got a war coming. Could be a nuclear war. We've got global warming. It could be global burning. It feels like this cycle. And so it made me wonder when we were looking at, the talk of restrictions coming back. Is it just the time of COVID to return again, just keeping us constantly in a state of fear? I don't know. So when I said, are the restrictions coming back, could well just be another psychological operation in itself, and might not be. So what's the literature on the use of behavioural science say? It makes it very clear that if governments want to use behavioural science on the public, it needs the permission and the ongoing approval of the public. Now, I don't remember anyone asking me if I want to have the pants frightened off me to change how I act. So it shows they didn't listen to the safety mechanisms. And I also put here another thing that I thought was really important, that the UK government were being advised around about the same time that COVID started to happen and the lockdowns happened, that there was a link between the use of behavioural science and an increase in suicide. And they didn't listen to the safety mechanisms or the risk factors. And to show that it's known it was wrong what they did, we've got the current Prime Minister telling us it was wrong. Wrong to scare people like that. Absolutely, it was wrong. We've got an educational psychologist who sat on the advisory panel to the government who recommended using fear as a means of control, saying it's not ethical, and saying it smacks of totalitarianism. And we've got a board member of the Behavioural Insights team saying the most egregious and far-reaching mistake was the level of fear willingly conveyed on the public. I agree with that, but fear goes hand in hand with censorship, because to back up censorship, you have to make people frightened. And if we make an example of the doctors by sending them through all these hearings or board, whatever they've been saying, they've been through this, all the good doctors have been telling us today, other doctors don't speak up. So censorship and fear go hand in hand. And I want to just finish on this quote to back up that point. It's by Harry Truman, and it was a special message to the Congress of the Internal Security of the United States in 1950. And he said, once a government is committed to the principle of silencing the voice of opposition, it has only one way to go. And that is down the path of increasingly repressive measures until it becomes a source of terror to all of its citizens and creates a country where everyone lives in fear. We cannot let that happen. We have to speak up and keep speaking up and telling other people what's going on. So I want to say once again, thank you to everyone for speaking up. Everyone who comes here, you're making a huge difference. And I'm really grateful and honoured to be here talking today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. Welcome.